I tell you what, you know when people are enjoying networking, when it's so difficult to drag them back from coffee. And on one hand, this is great because superb relationships are starting. On the other, we've got a great final session for you. So delegates, if you would like to come and take your seats as quickly as you can, please, for our final session this afternoon. And while everyone is taking their seats, can I just remind you that we have networking drinks later? And we've talked a lot about the youth today. We'll be starting tomorrow morning talking about the youth. That's from 9 o'clock tomorrow. Delegates, please come and take your seats as quickly as you can, and we'll start our final session. Thank you. And if you're joining us online, welcome. Don't forget to use the Q&A function on Swapcard, and we will take questions from the audience during this final session as well. And if you are joining us here in the room for this final session, and it's your first session today, don't forget to use the Interactico app for the translation as well. And if you are just joining us online, we do have translation for you. You'll find the details on Swapcard. Wonderful. Okay, let's get started. Let's get started with our final session. We're going to concentrate now on the vital role of the just transition mechanism when it comes to reducing poverty. Now, this is something that has already been spoken about today, but we're going to hone in on it now. And when we say poverty, we don't just mean financial poverty, we mean transport poverty, housing poverty. That has already been spoken about. So what can the just transition mechanism do to alleviate all different kinds of poverty wherever it is needed? So looking at all different regions, different projects, and different communities. That's what we're going to concentrate on now. And again, we'll look at some successful examples as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, to moderate our final session this afternoon, please welcome from DG ENER, please welcome Alejandro Althuren. Alejandro, thank you.
Thanks a lot for the kind introduction, and good afternoon to everyone. It's really great to be here for this session. So my name is Alejandro Althuren. I am the head of unit for consumers, local initiatives, and the just transition at the Directorate General for Energy in the European Commission. It's really great to be here today and to be part of this Just Transition Platform Conference. And I really am honored that I have the opportunity to moderate this session on the just transition combating poverty. One important concept for today's discussions is multifaceted, the multifaceted nature of poverty. That is what we are going to be focusing on today. And I gather that I'm not speaking to the right mic. So probably you missed my introduction, but not a problem, because what you want to do is to listen to our panelists. So what I was saying is that we want to focus today, now, in our session, on the multifaceted nature of poverty. That encompasses energy poverty, transport poverty, and access to housing. Three very important angles of poverty. Just some data to put things into context. For instance, when we talk about energy poverty, in fact, the situation is bad and hasn't gotten better in the last years. According to Eurostat, which is the statistic office of the European Commission, almost 10% of the EU population struggled to sufficiently heat their homes in 2022. And that is an increase of 3 percentage points compared to the previous years. Obviously, the number that we should be looking at is 0%. That is our challenge. That's the common challenge of authorities, activists, people on the ground, all of us together. We need to make this number 0. And that's the point. That's the idea with the discussion that we are going to have today. The point, what we want to do is to have a holistic discussion, to look at the problem from its entirety, and see how we can prevent and reduce poverty in its various forms. And we will try to make that as specific and concrete as possible. We will look at the tools and at the practices and how we go about fighting poverty. In particular, we will have the opportunity to look at the EU framework and then at existing tools. And one of these tools, a very important one, of course, is the Just Transition Mechanism. After we finish our discussion, we have more or less an hour for that. I hope we will all have a better understanding, more ideas, more motivation to see how we go about driving a just transition, which is a catalyst for poverty alleviation. But before we go into the discussion, there is always a very good thing to do in all meetings like this one, which is to do a warm-up with the help of Slido. So if I am not mistaken, you are going to get a QR code on some screen, which I hope you have access to, and it's probably that screen there. And then I would like to invite you all to take part in a questionnaire. I am not sure if the Slido questionnaire, but I'm sure it's coming up. Else, we can leave the question for later. Because actually my question, voila, that's it. So we have to trust the system. The system worked. So you have your QR code in the screens. If you wish to join the discussion, this short poll, please scan the QR code. And then you will find a very straightforward question, which is, what word comes up to your mind when you hear poverty in the context of the just transition? So, poverty in the context of the just transition, what is the word that comes immediately to your mind? So I see that there's already a few words, a few concepts coming up. And I am not sure if I am happy or unhappy about that, because as I told you, I am working in the Directorate General for Energy, so energy is an important angle in fighting poverty, and I see that energy poverty is really there at the middle of the word clouds. Unemployment, very important concept as well. Injustice, vulnerability, very good. Exclusion, that's a really, really important angle. Well, I think we are getting a rather rich cloud of concepts for giving us what is important for you, what comes up quickly to your mind when we talk about poverty in the context of just transition. I see the biggest concepts are energy poverty, so I think we have to devote a little bit of time to that. Exclusion, vulnerability, those injustice, fight against injustice, that's very important, and of course, unemployment. So let's keep that in our minds, and I am noting myself a couple of concepts that we will come back to later. So thank you very much. This is the result of our poll, and this is a kind of warm-up exercise before the actual start of our panel, which I'm sure you are all looking forward to. So we will start our panel with a keynote speech, which I'm sure is going to be really, really interesting. And then after our keynote speech, we will have 5 persons in the panel who will be addressing the topic of the discussion. And for the keynote presentation, I am really very happy to welcome and invite Juliana Wahlgren. Juliana, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Juliana Wahlgren is the director of the European Anti-Poverty Network, and she will give us a keynote presentation. Juliana will give us a keynote presentation on the various dimensions of poverty in the context of the energy and climate transition. I am really, really very keen on hearing how the Just Transition Policy Framework can contribute to reducing and preventing poverty. So Juliana, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Juliana Santos Wahlgren. I'm the director of the European Anti-Poverty Network, APN. For those who are not familiar with APN, we are a network of networks working across Europe to fight against poverty and social exclusion. I would like to thank the Commission and the platform for this invitation, but I could not start this conversation without saying that I'm not here representing only EAPN as a civil society organization, but also as a voice of people experiencing poverty. We have 34 delegations of people experiencing poverty in our networks, and I think this conversation should start with some perspective on how do they see the just transition in reality. I would like to kick off our discussion with 2 quotes, just that we could contextualize what people are really experiencing on the ground. The first quote was from a PEP delegate from the Netherlands. I couldn't pay energy bills last year because my father has Alzheimer's and my mom got ill. I couldn't afford both doctors and electricity bills at the same time. I have to stop paying electricity, and therefore it was disconnected. The other example comes from Croatia. I have an above average salary, but I live well below the poverty line. Everyone looks at income, but nobody looks at expenses. Let me start again with some data, like I think everybody started with some statistics information. In Europe, 1 in 5 people are at risk of poverty or social exclusion. Close to 10% of households are living in energy poverty, rising to up 20% for the lowest income groups. In the context of the just transition, social policies are too often an afterthought to the industrial, climate, and digital initiatives, where the needs of people are forgotten, and as a result, people are left behind. As mentioned before, poverty is multidimensional, and it goes beyond just access to goods and service. It guards all aspects of life, and each experience of poverty may reinforce another, causing stress, stigma, and discrimination. And any attempt to address poverty has to tackle all the areas simultaneously, making sure that policies do not reinforce negative impacts over here and hence difficulties over there. So when it means being truly intersectional, we should also address the structural and systemic dimension of poverty. But who are these people? Who are the vulnerable groups affected by poverty? Women. Women face structural inequality as they also face lower wages and have to assume care responsibility. Number 2, and I think we're going to talk about it tomorrow, youth and people with a low-level education attainment. There is an interactive effect between poverty and education where one feeds the other and vice versa. The less access to higher information one gets, the fewer job opportunities one is offered. Children, where additionally vulnerability will increase the risk, the size of the family, if they live in a remote area, if they come from racialized minorities, or if a parent is unemployed. Elderly. The major cause of pensioner poverty is the cost of being sick. Unemployment. While employment remains a critical source of income to escape poverty, in-work poverty increases every day. However, there are some categories that we call the missing poor that we don't see in the statistics. And it was interesting to see the Roma mentioned over there because there is lack of data on Roma communities, as there is also lack of data on migrants and refugees, lack of data on homelessness people, people with disability, and people deprived of liberty. EAPN just launched last week a Poverty Watch. So it's our annual report to check the trends on poverty across Europe. Our report this year had the title, Towards a Sustainable Social Welfare for the People, ? We would like to explore 2 points when we did this report, 2 assumptions that we tried either to confirm or to invalidate. First assumption, social and environment sustainability are intrinsically linked, but the current framework shows a great lack of synergy. So you have policies that are still working siloed, and they are not consistent. Second, redistribution of resources from the richer to the poor is crucial to guarantee access to rights and participation in politics and democracy. Social and green policies need to be more interlinked to complement each other, to strengthen each other's impact. Green policy measures often risk imposing proportionally greater costs on those with the lowest incomes. For us, there is an opportunity to treat climate policy as a question of redistributional justice. One example, higher taxes on fossil fuels and fertilizers increase the price of food and energy in the short term. This hurts low-income households most, as food and energy make a larger proportion of their spending. I'd like to give another example in this intersection of cost, spending, climate in Greece. I quote, "The situation stressed me out with children. The rising rent also stressed me as well, the electricity bills, the supermarket, everything. Children want things and I cannot afford it." That should mean, perhaps, the need to strengthen wealth taxes targeting high net worth individuals and large corporations to ensure a more equitable distribution of resources, reduce wealth concentration, and use the resources to fund social protection programs. Additionally, it's imperative that both public and private financial flows are completely aligned with the transition. This is not the time to go back into austerities and competitiveness at all costs, without thinking about the needs of the people or the planet. Europe needs a renewed commitment to social progress where everyone's rights are recognized and vindicated. This requires prioritizing social policy and putting people first, where initiatives can eradicate, not only alleviate poverty, promote progress, and build inclusive societies atop of the European policy agenda. To conclude, as the APN, we call on the EU institutions and member states to consider the following key components and measures in the development and implementation of such framework. Number 1, we need a new ecosystem. We need to adopt a holistic, cross-sectorial, and coherent approach to policymaking for a just transition. linking the economic, environmental, social dimensions of the green transition. This can be done perhaps by adopting a whole of government approach in the institution, in strengthening impact assessment requirements, and measures to focus on the social, distributional, health, and employment impacts of both climate and inaction. Second, we need to prioritize and to address the root cause of poverty. Data urgently needs to tackle the cost of living crisis with an intersectional and comprehensive approach that prioritizes the participation of vulnerable communities and people experiencing poverty in the policy design, implementation, and monitoring of policies. Third, we need to ensure global equity in EU green policies. We cannot talk about Europe, the global north, without thinking about the global south. Then to finalize, because this is a space also that I hope we validate and we take into account the voices of those affected by these policies, we need to ensure social dialogue, civil dialogue with people experiencing poverty in decision-making on just transition, including throughout support from relevant funding mechanism and capacity building. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Juliana Wahlgren, director of the European Anti-Poverty Network. This was really a great keynote speech. You gave us so much food for thought for today. First of all, you brought us vivid and clear examples of what are the problems that we need to tackle and how they are all somehow, as we were saying at the beginning, and as I think you, Juliana, you said it yourself, so we have energy issues, employment issues, housing issues, health. It's a variety of problems, and I got a clear message from your keynote speech, Juliana, that they need to be tackled simultaneously. And they not only need to be tackled simultaneously, they also need to be tackled in a structural way. So we shouldn't look for short or mid-term solutions. I also found it really important that we really need to have a good view of who are the anti-poverty measures addressed. We need data, and we need to be aware that there is a lack of data regarding certain parts of our population that we need to look further input. And I really appreciated that you were giving us concrete examples for action, and that's it. One, which from the policy making perspective is very important for me, is the need to fight against silos. So everyone, we should pool our resources and our minds together and work together in solving the different problems. We should avoid that each of us tries to tackle a little part in the policy making, and then we are not looking at things structurally and in the most efficient way. And also, I heard important words about the importance of redistributive policies and avoiding that the burden of the transition falls on the most vulnerable, which would be actually the opposite of what we should be trying to achieve. So, Juliana Wahlgren, I once again would like to thank you for this very inspiring introductory speech. And Juliana, you are actually coming back as a member of the panel. So what I'm going to do now is introduce the members of the panel. I will name them one by one, and I will invite them to come to our stage here. And then before we start, don't worry, there is another Slido poll. So there's always a Slido polls in these meetings, and then we will start our actual discussion. So I would like to introduce Michał Hetmanski, CEO of Instrat Foundation from Poland. Michał, welcome to this panel. I would also like to introduce Max Bird, Senior Policy Officer of Just Transition at WWF EU. So Max, welcome to our panel. The next, I think we have one chair for everyone, so that's good. So next I would like to welcome Dora Biondiani. Dora is the Senior Project Coordinator at the Energy Poverty Advisory Hub, the Climate Alliance. So Dora, welcome. Then I would also like to welcome Dr. Eleonora Gaidarova, who is the chairperson of the Union of Homeowners Associations and is also involved in the coordination of the energy poverty in the JUSTEM program that we would like to hear a little bit about maybe later. So welcome, Eleonora. Then next, I would like to welcome Dr. Johanna Cludius, senior researcher at the ECO Institute. Johanna, welcome. And then again, of course, I would like to welcome back Juliana Wahlgren, who, as I said, is the director of the European Anti-Poverty Network. So, Juliana, welcome back to our panel. And I am acutely aware that I am behind a column. So, people here can see me and people here can see me, but I don't want to be here because then you wouldn't be able to see the panelists. So I'm going to move here, if that is okay with the organizers. Yeah, I think it should work like that. So, I think we are all looking forward to hearing from our panelists. I think we have a lot of food for thought already from the very good introduction by our keynote speech by Juliana. But let's do another Slido poll, for which I think we will get the QR code on the screen, which you can, voila, which you scan. And this time, it is a multiple choice question. And the multiple choice question, so this is becoming sophisticated, is the following. In your region, what are the main poverty-related challenges to address in the context of the just transition? And then you can choose one or several of the following. Reducing and preventing energy poverty, reducing and preventing transport poverty, improving housing conditions of the most vulnerable, and improving regional cohesion within the member state. And I think we can already see trends in our screen. So possibly housing. Yeah. Sorry? Very good. So I should go to the lectern. Very good. I shouldn't stay behind the column. Very good. So I move on now in front of my panelists and I go to the lectern. So, but I will give the microphone back to the table. Good. So, what we got here is, indeed, housing and energy poverty seem to be the main poverty-related challenges to address in the context of the just transition in your region. And here we have another element which is very important in the context of our conversation today, which is that we must avoid speaking about abstract things. We need to talk about concrete things, and we need to root those examples in the reality of the territories we carry out our action in. Voila, so I think we're ready now for the panel. So I will now look to the panel. Now I have a kind of a biased view on the panel, but I will manage. So let's start our discussion. I think we already got a couple of, let's say, indications of what are the issues that we want to look into today. Certainly, the most important thing is how do we link the just transition with preventing and alleviating poverty. And I am acutely aware that we shouldn't go for alleviating. That is what Juliana said. We should talk about eradicating poverty. Okay, so that's the first important question. And then secondly, let's see in our discussion how can we ensure that vulnerable groups and populations at risk of poverty or living in poverty are involved in the just transition processes, and we have mechanisms to make sure that solutions are tailored to their needs. So we're talking here about participation and being able to shape society, which is also a very important part of the just transition. As we could see that there was a strong, let's say, element on energy poverty, I would propose to leave this element on energy poverty for let's say, the second part of our discussion. And I would propose that we start now with Michał, with Max, and Juliana. And I would really like to ask you to address the two questions that I made a moment ago from your own perspective and based on your experience. So, Michał, you start.
Many topics to raise. Thanks once again for the introduction. As we're speaking primarily in this panel about energy poverty, I would like to give several examples about how in 7 Polish coal regions we see different things. Unfortunately, I don't have the data to support my thesis, but we definitely have stakeholders from regions of Zgorzelec and Turów. I see girls there. We have representatives of the Konin region or of Silesia, so please disagree with me if I'm mistaking something. But we see a very mixed picture of this. To give you an example, in most of the coal mining communities, we have actually seen a pretty big source of wealth in the region that has not been evenly distributed. It's a well-known phenomenon in the economic literature or in the history that for this resource dependency, you're not valuing this, this huge source of wealth of the tax income that the local coal mine or the coal industry or the industrial conglomerate is bringing to you, and hence you're not spending this wisely, you're not preventing things like energy poverty. So, for instance, in the regions of like Silesia, you have a huge wealth coming historically from the mining and coal sector exploitation, but it has not been evenly distributed. That's why in probably one of the most wealthiest industrial regions in this part of Europe, you still have a big problem, particularly with the governance of the communities, of the home owners and of the multifamily buildings, whereas huge source of wealth did not actually reach the end beneficiaries. That's why you have, in a practice, rich in capital, but not rich in income tenants living in old houses that are literally very hard to refurbish. So this is one of the examples that is faced by many of the Silesian homeowners of the regional governments, that they now actually have a huge amount of money, this abundance of funding coming from the JTF. Silesia is one of the most equipped and the largest beneficiary of JTF, but reaching those beneficiaries to get them out of the energy poverty is a big challenge. Why? Because of the governance, of the ownership. Ownership in a post-Soviet country like Poland is still a huge issue. I need to own my land and I need to stick to my property rights. This is very much a challenge. On the other hand, I can give an example of the Bełchatów region in the central Poland from the Łódzkie Voivodeship. I also see the stakeholders and representatives of this region there. And actually one of the mining community that is the headquarter to the lignite mine is actually one of the wealthiest one per capita in terms of tax revenue in Poland. And when the JTF programming has been happening there for the last years, it went out that there is actually nothing to do in terms of preventing energy poverty. I'm simplifying to some extent here. Why? Because most of the single-family buildings, and there are mostly those in the community of Kleszczów, do not need additional thermal retrofit. Why? Because they have managed to redistribute this wealth from the huge tax revenue to very capital-intensive programs on thermal retrofits. So actually, it's not a big issue. So We're facing a huge disparity here, and that's why I'm smiling to the representative of the EU Commission. It's good that we've managed, along the phase of the programming of the EU funds, to allow regions to justify how much do they need for the particular resources. But what I'm hope for the next phase of the Just Transition Fund, and I know it will be a universal rule in the multi-annual financial framework, that the funding will be linked to reforms. This is something what we know from the RRF, Polish KPO program, that we link reforms to the disbursement of the funding. And I believe not only Poland, but many other post-Soviet countries do have this ownership problem. It's a highly embedded social complex problem, and that people, the homeowners, stick to their property perception, their ownership rights, and they do not necessarily allow for this thermal retrofit to happen. This is indeed now also a problem within the EPBD directive, where now conservative groups are raising a question. The EU wants to get away my home. They want to how do you call it? Expropriate me from my home. This is very much a question. So I really hope for the next Just Transition Fund in particular, but for the all cohesion funds, that we particularly demand the national legislators to simplify the legislation allowing for the retrofits happening there, so that we test those routes, how to actually make the energy consumers, the citizens, be more happy with the outcome and less burdened with the process of making the thermal retrofit. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Thank you very much, Michał. That was really, really good. I think that from what you said, you were presenting very clear examples from a region that you know very well. And by the way, colleagues who are here and who are from that region, if they want to disagree, Michał invited you to disagree, so you might disagree. And there you touch on something which is very important from the policy-making perspective, which is that, in fact, the EU level, in view of the different crises that we have faced in recent years, has mobilized, in the spirit of solidarity, quite vast sums of money. But now, are we using, or are we going to use these vast sums of money in such a way that we eradicate poverty, or is there a risk that we actually use some of this money to increase disparities? So this is very important, and it links, and you used the example of the Just Transition Fund, but this, I think that by discussing or by having a conversation around that example, we can draw lessons for the other funds and funding opportunities that you mentioned. And here, again, I keep in mind the very strong plea by Juliana of the importance of the redistributive policies. So thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Michał. And maybe Max, now, would like to tell us what's the perspective of WWF on all this? So the floor is yours.
I think I'm going to displease our moderator. I'm sorry, Alejandro, I'm not going to zoom down on one particular region. And I'm going to take a slightly larger picture, but I hope it's a constructive framing for some other things to be set in. We have this rather enormous question of how can Just Transition play a role in preventing and alleviating or eliminating poverty. And I mean, the risk is that people go, oh, gracious me, I mean, it's hard enough already, and now we need to eliminate poverty as well. Is that really, how can we do all of this? And I think just thinking a little bit about the framing and where things connect can actually help us to wrestle with this. A simple answer in terms of our contribution to eliminating poverty is to get the Just Transition done as fast and effective as possible within the spirit in which it was intended. So we know that the climate crisis hits those with the least resources, those in most vulnerable situations hardest. We know that the longer we take to fix our systems and our structures, and the longer we take to decarbonize our societies, the more impact there will be on the people who we are focusing on when we talk about poverty. So actually, yes, it's not to eliminate us from other responsibilities or wider conversations, but let's get our job done. Let's focus on this urgent implementation and ramping that up and sharing our learnings around the just transition, because otherwise we're going to go in the opposite direction. I have to say, from a WWF perspective, my job is to speak very loudly and clearly about the urgency of the climate crisis, the underestimation of the impacts, and that should be a key framing when we consider this. When we think about poverty, we often think about individuals in poverty. We think about, or households sometimes, but we think about material deprivation, we think about energy poverty, the inability of an individual or a family to keep warm. Maybe we've got as far as thinking about transport poverty, inability to access some essential services, double disadvantage when you're trying to get a job or get an education, and all that compounding it to keep you in that poverty trap. But actually, we also know that poverty has societal impacts. It's a collective problem, and it's a bit like Just Transition in that sense. If the Just Transition project is about decarbonising as fast and as smart and as fairly as possible, not because we're nice, but because the climate crisis affects us all, it's for our collective gain, then maybe we also need to start thinking about poverty as a collective societal problem, one that the further we let it build, the more it fragments our societies. We get social exclusion, we get isolation, we get social fracturing, we get extremist policies, we get political disenfranchising, and that is a real problem at the moment. So knitting those frames together to look at these as collective issues, I think, is also useful in maybe our current political environment. How, in practice, the Just Transition exercise supports poverty alleviation. I'm going to leave some more specific examples to my esteemed colleagues. Many of you here will be working on projects where you see the link, because it is about better buildings, it is about job access, it is about those essential services. Overall, we know that when we look at the Just Transition Fund and its regulation, it says poverty twice. I Googled it. And always in connection with energy poverty and energy efficiency. But it always says people first, and it always says social first, in terms of overall aspirations. But we also know that the things that we classify as social investments are not the ones that are coming through most strongly in the TJTPs. So maybe that's a challenge for us as well, to look at where our priorities are and what part that has in our particular context. It's not just about what we do and which projects. I think we have a lot to share as a Just Transition community in terms of the process that we've been through and that we're still struggling with in some senses, and the whole planning aspect, and to bring these into the arena. And that comes into ensuring that vulnerable groups and affected people get involved in Just Transition. It does come so much down to engagement, participation, communications, outreach. I was in one of the working groups under the Just Transition platform that have just wrapped up, and our action area was about communicating about Just Transition, and we did a survey around how people like to receive their communications. And I mean, there was a big variety. That's one obvious outcome. But one of the big learnings, or again, probably an obvious learning, is there really is no shortcut. You know, everybody wants to be engaged with in a different way. People get more value out of live communications in terms of having tailored information and be able to interact and talk about their situation and find where they fit with this initiative. So just putting up a web page isn't going to cut it. It is about the live consultations, the town hall meetings, and when people don't come to those town hall meetings because they don't get the information, or they're trying to hold down 3 jobs, or they're too busy with all the other challenges they have, then we have to go to where the people are if we really want to know what's going on with them, whether that's the school gate, whether that's the bars, whether that's the churches. We have to get out there, and it takes time, and you need to invest capacity, but there is no shortcut. I'm going to wrap up soon because I haven't been watching the time, but I wanted to give a shout out for civil society. Who here is from a civil society organisation? Or an NGO, if you prefer to be called an NGO, or a community group or a charity. Not as many as I'd hoped, and we're often on the list of important stakeholders for meaningful stakeholder engagement, but we are your secret allies, so you do need to get to know us better. And this is going to come up again. We're an added value in the TJTP process. We heard from the monitoring session this afternoon about the values of civil society in monitoring, but it's not just about monitoring. There are environmental organisations, social organisations, community groups, women's groups, football clubs, who know what's going on with people and see poverty, how it's lived out in the day-to-day life, and can therefore help our policymakers find out who's poor and what might be the criteria for being poor in a particular area. So when you're looking at your social climate plans and you're going, oh gosh, we don't have any data, and how are we going to manage to draw up these plans within the next year in order to access these promised billions that are going to hopefully complement our just transition activities, please don't forget your civil society allies. I have much more to say, but I'm going to surrender the microphone.
Thanks a lot, Max. That was really, really brilliant, and we count on you, and we will continue to count on you. That's for sure. And you and your other colleagues representing civil society. Brilliant. You gave us many, many ideas, which I will not try to sum up, but two or three things stuck in my mind. One is the timing implementation element and how this is not a problem that we can tackle in 20, 30 years. We need to tackle the problem now, and this is really very important. And then we need to really have smart processes and planning in order to achieve our policy objectives, which, by the way, as you said, are not contradictory. So tackling poverty is important, tackling climate change is also very important, hence the importance of process and planning. You said something that I liked a lot, Max, which is the issue of participation. So participation does not only makes the process more efficient and pertinent, but participation is a right. It's a right of all citizens. So it's not a peripheral thing. It's a right of all citizens to shape the society in which they live in. So I like that very much. And I took note also of something which in my view was very important, which is it's not only about material poverty, but it's societal poverty as well, which is very important. So thank you. Thanks again, Max, for that. And now I would like to invite Juliana to intervene again. What would you like to tell us about the two specific questions that we have at hand?
Hello? Yes. Well, just to complement, I agree with Max that we should address poverty as we address climate. Is about an urgent need. It should be taken as priority. When it comes to the participation of people experiencing poverty, of course, it's more than just the mechanisms, but also understanding the complexity of this participation. It's 2024, it's a year of elections, but it's also times of austerity. There is also the phenomenon of shrinking spaces. So it was good to hear who comes from the civil society, but when you go to the national, local level, this representation is even less. When talking with our delegates of people experiencing poverty across Europe, what they tell us is they never get invited to these consultations. They never get an invitation to these exchanges with government. There is even a counter effect that sometimes they are even stigmatized because they take this place. Many people, they are also criminalized by being poor. So there is a matter of how our democratic spaces are being managed as well to be sure that everyone can participate and no one is left behind. When it comes also to a fair representation, you also have to understand that, especially those working, when they have to take time to participate and attend and help in policies, they have to sacrifice their income to participate. And I want to share with you an example. I will not mention the country, but what happened to one of our rounds of consultations with national and local government when it comes to discussions on plans on poverty, and where the climate was a cross-cutting issue, where we could also address energy poverty. In one of these rounds, one of our participants said, if I attend, I have to miss work. And I miss work, I don't have an income. And we say, well, we're going to help you with that. So we can reimburse your costs. The problem is that because this person was also benefit from an extra support and income, the moment that we transfer the money for the participation of this person, the social benefit was removed. That's the reality of people. So it's really important that that's why I emphasize the need of a new ecosystem. We need to understand that this system is not working, and we have to find new solutions to address the alignment across policies. I could not stress enough that the social element of the just transition is a second thought, is never a priority. It was good to hear this morning all the examples and projects, but only probably 3 or 4 times the word social was mentioned. So, and like Max said, what it really does mean? Well, it also means that if I attend a meeting, probably I'll need to seek support too for my family, for my children. I will have problems with work. So what are the solutions that we can find to make this participation meaningful and not a burden for our people?
Thanks a lot, Juliana. A really important point. You started with the concept, or I noted in your intervention, you mentioned at the beginning the context of democratic space, participation, and then you wrapped it up with the broader concept of ecosystem, which again is not just about participation per se, but about citizens being able to exercise their rights as citizens, no matter their social status, their income, etc. That was really very important for me. And yeah, I think you were clear. You find that social elements should take more priority in the discussion of the Just Transition Fund. So that, on the Just Transition. So that was very well noted. Thank you. Thanks, Juliana. And I propose now that we move on to energy. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, we have unfortunately seen an increase in energy poverty. That's unfortunate because, as we said, we should look at eradicating. So how can the Just Transition mechanism and other instruments at EU level or at different levels we use to reduce and prevent and eradicate energy poverty, in particular in those regions which are most in need? So I would like to give the floor to you, Dora, first, and then I would give the floor to Eleonora.
Hello?
I hope you have a mic that works. If not,
Hello?
that one there works.
Yeah, I think it works. Thank you very much. I first want to say that when I participate to this type of events, I realize how working at the Energy Poverty Advisory Hub, it's really enriching us, because we have the probably unique chance to talk at the same time with the civil society organization, local governments, vulnerable consumers directly, and collect their input, and tend to make a hover and see all over Europe what is going on. And this morning and today, there were mentioned so many keywords of things. It was mentioned health in the dashboard. It was mentioned the Roman communities, the minority. Someone before made a question on how to design energy-effective actions. And every time I could pinpoint a city that can give an example of a possible solution. Mm-hmm. This, I think, it should be a message that we keep with us. At local level, there are cities that are working effectively with the civil society organizations. They know their vulnerable consumers, and they're putting all their energy to provide solutions. I can mention just a few, but there are many more that can pop into my mind and spread the seeds that they already developed. For the just transition areas, we are working with West Macedonia, where they have addressed specifically to move forward, to talk with the citizens, to increase awareness about having a win-win solution on moving the transition without leaving them behind, trying to keep into consideration their point of view, their fears, fears of losing job and unemployment, and engaging all the different level of the consumers, not only the unemployed, but also the minorities that are present in the area. We are working much more also with Hungary, where we are specifically trying to empower the citizens to understand the cost on health of not moving to the transitions, because it's quite known the health impacts of their situation. And with our experts, we are trying to promote more and more sustainable solutions that at the same time are giving them possibility to move forward. And this is just two of the examples, but there are really many more that we will happy to share with all the communities to understand how it can be and it can happen to have both, as far as you engage and you keep all the people into consideration, as the colleagues were really mentioning.
Thanks a lot, Dora. Really useful. Again, I would like to congratulate you not only for the very clear points that you made, but also for the work of the Energy Poverty Advisory Hub, which, as you said, really tries to help and finding concrete solutions which are adapted to the ground, but also looking at the multidimensional aspect. And I think this is something which has come up in the conversation again and again. And looking at the problem from different perspectives doesn't make it more complicated. It makes the solution easier, hopefully. So thank you very much. I would like now to give the floor to Eleonora. So what's your perspective on the energy issues that we have to tackle?
Hello to everyone. I would like to present the work on Just Time project. That is a life-funded project focused on 6 Just Time coal regions. This is Stara Zagora in Bulgaria, Istria in Croatia, Western Macedonia in Greece, Silesia in Poland, and Asturias in Spain. Here I would like to emphasize that whenever we are speaking to use the Just Transition Mechanism and Fund, first we have to know using for what. And we need it in the beginning of the project to assess the level of energy poverty in the coal regions of Just Time, because so far we have idea about the energy poverty at national level. But about the regional, the local level, we hardly do. Therefore, in the project, we try to elaborate a strong, robust set of indicators through 4 main dimensions: vulnerability, buildings, energy, direct measurement of energy poverty, of course within the energy poverty alleviation policy at national and local level. And from this perspective, to measure what is the exact situation of energy poverty at regional level, and this is to be refracted through the lens of the Just Transition matrix. Because yes, we have idea about energy poverty in general terms, but refracted through the Just Transition mechanism is something completely different, or at least there are different dimensions. Therefore, based on this analysis, giving us idea about the status of energy poverty at regional level, and at regional level in the Just Transition regions, coal regions of Just Time, we went further and evaluated the risks and evaluated the capacity of these regions to tackle with energy poverty. How they can really tackle from one point of view, I mean to cope with energy poverty, negative impacts on communities, on economy and so on society. But from the other hand, to see their capacity to alleviate all those risks and not to allow going further with the energy poverty, the just transition processes to increase the level of energy poverty. Therefore, in between, all this work, we've made a serious impact analysis of all negative impacts of the just transition process on the coal regions from one side, and from the other side, how the topic of energy poverty is reflected in the territorial just transition plans. It means once we assess the level at regional, the level of energy poverty in the regions at regional level, then the risks, then the impacts. And then we are trying really to elaborate and to think about the main areas of intervention, where to work, where to invest, the possibilities of the Just Transition Mechanism and the Just Transition Fund, together with other specialized EU funds and EU programs and EU policy instruments. And here, what we found really a very powerful tool, these are the national recovery and resilience plans, because I'm very happy what I've seen that you've put on the first and second place. It was all the time moving, first, second, the renovation, the energy efficiency, the building, because we do believe, strongly do believe, that the complexity of the energy poverty phenomenon in these regions is really, is determined by the interaction and intersection of three main dimensions: the built, the social, and the just. And then we do really have the right instruments to go further and to prepare the energy poverty alleviation plans for the regions from one side, but to back up these plans with concrete projects, to elaborate them based on pipeline of projects, and to back up all possible areas of intervention, assessing the risks, the impacts, and improving the situation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Eleonora. This was really, really great, and thanks for sharing your experience on the ground that we really needed. As said at the beginning, we don't need to talk in abstract here. We need to talk about the concrete things. But in order to do so, we need data, which is something you said at the beginning. And then local, by definition, is always different. It's always specific. And there I noted the three things that can be different: the risks, the capacities, and the impacts, which is something that we need to keep in mind when we do policy. When we do policy. And then again, you refer to the multidimensional element, and you refer to housing, and I would agree with you as one clear policy area where the multidimensional element is perfectly clear. Thanks a lot. I would like to propose now to move on to Joanna and to hear about transport poverty. I think it would be great, Joanna, if you could tell us what is, in your view, transport poverty and how we can tackle it. Before I give you the floor, maybe, Joanna, you would be happy to hear that this weekend we had in the European Commission a citizens' dialogue where 150 citizens from all over Europe were gathered and asked to express their priorities in the area of energy efficiency in general. This was chaired by Vice President Šefčovič, and there was a lot of intervention. This was very dynamic, and we got a number of recommendations which were made public today. And actually, citizens gave a lot of importance to the transport sector in the area of energy efficiency and have asked the Commission to particularly look at transport as a means to improve the way in which we use energy. But I wouldn't like to preempt your intervention. I just wanted to refer to that. Joanna, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Alejandro. That's really good to hear, because I think, as we've all noticed, at the moment, transport poverty is not known as widely and not researched as widely, and it's just not as much on the agenda as energy poverty, although we know from the literature and from the research that we've been doing that levels of transport poverty are on par with energy poverty, depending a little bit on the indicator that you use, but I think it's fair to say that the problem is just as important. So it's good that we're catching up there, really good. What is transport poverty? Transport poverty is an issue that has many different aspects. Transport poverty is related to the availability or inavailability of transport options, both public and private, to the affordability of transportation options, and very much linked to this question around access to essential services. And by essential services, I mean jobs and job opportunities, education, health services, but also things like grocery shopping, visiting relatives, also being able to pursue hobbies, things that contribute to your quality of life and that make sure that you don't face social exclusion. So it's very much connected to this idea. And if we think about groups that may be particularly affected, and I'm referring back to the groups that Juliana mentioned, it is groups like women that may have to commute or drive a lot to do the care work that they're doing. It's also children that have very different transportation needs from grown-ups or from their parents, because they have to go to school or have to be taken to kindergarten. It's also the elderly who may have reduced mobility and are not able to access certain transport options. So there's very much, we look at transport poverty indicators and then check in which groups do we find high levels of transport poverty, and this helps us to formulate measures to combat this specific effect, this specific aspect. And the other question of how this is related to just transition plans, I think, like Meg said, it's not so hard to do this. It's probably just important to have this on the agenda and keep this in mind, because I think within the just transition plans, of course, there's a lot of aspects that are related to transport poverty that could increase transport poverty, or if you do it right, that could decrease transport poverty, like because you have structural changes within these regions, essential services may be located in a different spot, so jobs and job opportunities may end up in different places, and there may or may not be a transport network that can take you there, and this transport network may or may not be open to all of the people who live there. Also, policies that are related to green mobility in these regions. Of course, you could, I think if these ideas of transport poverty are on the agenda, you could think about how you can make this accessible or affordable for everyone. There are measures related to reducing the cost of these options for the vulnerable groups once you've identified them. There are measures that are more related to infrastructure, to extending the transport network, of course, preferably a climate-friendly transport network. And in terms of process, of course, we have now this process coming up, or it's already started, that member states are drawing up their social climate plans, and they have to submit them mid-next year. And on the one hand, I think it's very important that in these social climate plans, you take into account the experience that were made when drawing up the just transition plans, also noting, and I think we've heard this many times now, that at the local level you may have additional knowledge that's not available at the federal level or at the national level on who are the vulnerable groups, who are those vulnerable groups on whom we don't even have any data, like that I can't even name from our research because we can't identify them because we don't have any data on them. So there, the local knowledge is very important, and I guess vice versa, this is really an opportunity for the just transition regions to get involved into these plans, because again, if we find that vulnerable groups are potentially overrepresented in the just transition regions, the social climate plans should also take this into account.
Thanks a lot, Joanna. Really, really useful and clear points that you made. As we don't have like much time left, I will just mention two. First of all, transport like energy is one of these enabling sectors. So if you don't have access to energy, you don't have access to transport, you cannot exercise your rights as citizens, etc. So it's really very important that we give it the importance that it deserves. And I think by providing us clear definition as you did, we are better equipped to do that. Also, building on what Juliana said at the beginning, Joanna, you referred to it, we need to be clear who are the persons who are in a situation of vulnerability, and we might not always have the clear picture. So getting this data is very important. And Joanna, I noted very well that maybe the knowledge is there, the experience is there, but the transmission of knowledge and the transmission of data is not ideal. And this is something that we should, in my opinion, tackle, because it's a waste. We have the knowledge, we have data, but if it doesn't cross across sectors and across countries in Europe, we are really wasting a very valuable resource. And then you made also the point on planning, I mean, social climate fund and so on. We need to, at the very early stage, include the right priorities so that then when the reality becomes a reality in the ground, the important concepts have been incorporated. Good, thank you very much. I must say that I am overwhelmed by the wealth of good ideas and practices that we get. And of course, I was overwhelmed in the practical sense because I wasn't looking at my watch. So basically, we have almost reached the end of our panel and the end of our session today. But we are not already there. So in terms of wrapping up the panel, what I would like to say is that we had a fantastic session. So first of all, what I would like to propose is a round of applause to our panelists. I think we got a clear idea that alleviating poverty must be at the core of the just transition, and we must make sure that no one is left behind. So in order to do, we have many tools that we have to efficiently use, and that concerns public sector, but also concerns stakeholders, civil society. So we all have a role to play, and these different roles need to be played in cooperation, in a spirit of solidarity, and keeping always in mind, laser focus on the important issue that we want to tackle. So knowing the data, knowing who are in a vulnerable situation is very important as then knowing what are the tools that we have at our disposal to tackle vulnerability and how these tools can be used. And we mentioned it, the Social Climate Fund can be a very good opportunity to test how we can put this into practice and to see how EU investments into a number of areas can bring the results in terms of not alleviating, but eradicating poverty. So we heard a lot of good ideas, but also a lot of concrete examples of good things or things that we need to tackle. And I think this was really very inspiring. We know that we can find the solutions, and we can also inspire others. So for me, this inspiration that the that the panel brought today is the main takeaway. So we bring this inspiration with us, and I think that all of us working together can work together and make progress in achieving the most important objective of eradicating poverty in the context of a just transition for all. But this is not the end of today's discussion. Now, in order to finalize our day today in a high note and to wrap up all the important discussions that we had today, before we leave, I am very happy to announce the presence with us today of Themis Christophidou. Themis Christophidou is the Director General for Regional and Urban Policy, and she will conclude our session today. So, Director General, the floor is yours for the conclusive remarks.